It is just a huge honor for me today to be podcast interviewing Mike Sissel with Kaleido.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming by. You have a very interesting story. You work with my next door neighbors.
That's right.
Mike was born and raised in Albany, Oregon, and graduated from Oregon State University in 1994. Following college graduation, he chose to follow a paycheck instead of his passion, teaching and mentoring. He worked for an insurance company for 2 years and quickly realized that a paycheck wasn't going to provide for a fulfilled, meaningful life, so he returned to graduate school and received his Master's of Arts in Teaching. After teaching for 10 years, he pursued a dream of starting his own business, which would allow him to reach a larger audience of youth. To date, Mike has shared his emotional intelligence teachings with thousands of youths and adults throughout the country. His mission is to be a spark for positive, sustainable change in the lives of others. So Kaleidoscope is coming up on 10 years. You've been doing this for a decade.
That's right. Kaleido.
I'm sorry.
There's a reason. You want me to explain the reason?
Yeah. Why did I want to say Kaleidoscope?
That's the most common thing that people call it. So the reason I chose that name, and it's kind of like, I used to get frustrated when people didn't understand the name. And then I realized later on that it's a great way for me to introduce what it is that I teach. So the Kaleido part is like a kaleidoscope. So you look through a kaleidoscope, you see a pattern, you change the angle of the kaleidoscope, pattern changes. The eye part, I always have to tell kids, I'm not an eye doctor. I'm not checking your eyesight. What I want to help people with is their mind sight. So I want them to look at their mind's eye. Now, all of us, I think, subconsciously know we have a mind's eye. It allows us to imagine. It allows us to visualize. It also allows us to think. So every time we have a thought, we're using our mind's eye. The problem is that nobody talks about their thoughts. It's kind of a hidden thing. Well, the average human being has between 50 to 75,000 thoughts per day, and about half of those are negative. So when I walk into a classroom, or when I work with anyone of any age, I have to assume that that person has about half of their thoughts that are negative. So a big part of what I try to do is to help people take off the mask and be real and vulnerable and get to the core of what do we do with these negative thoughts. Because what a lot of people do is they follow them instead of look at them. So I always say you have two choices. When you have a thought, you can look at it or you can look from it. So when I was growing up, just a big reason for me doing the work that I do, I struggled a lot with self-confidence. My most common belief was I'm not good enough. Now the crazy part is I was an awesome athlete, I was a wonderful person, I had a loving family, I was an amazing student, but I was really good at faking that everything was okay. So when I work with people today, my first thought is what is their core belief that's preventing them from being the person that they want to be?
That was beautiful and romantic. I've always believed that, the more people focus on other problems, like, people are, they're always talking about like politics or Putin or North Korea or this or that. And I always think everyone's 99% of all your problems live between your ears.
Yes, exactly.
And why are you spending all your time backseat driving what the government should do or North Korea should do? Why don't you look in the mirror?
Yeah.
And one of the famous generals said it's easier to conquer another nation's armies than it is to conquer the own demons that live in between your head.
Yes.
So do you think people spend too much of their time judging other people's problems and backseat driving everyone else instead of backseat driving their own thoughts in their own head?
I think it's honestly, it's our default response. It's, I don't want to look at me, so it's easier to go fix them. I always tell people the most precious real estate you own is the 6 inches between your ears. But what we're doing, and I include myself in this, is...
Can I steal that quote?
Absolutely. We allow other people to rent space in our head. Instead of, I tell kids all the time...
I'm just taking notes of this.
Absolutely.
I'm not texting on Facebook or something.
I tell kids all the time, if you were the owner of a 5-star resort, the most beautiful real estate possible in the world, and you had somebody come that was belligerent and critical and angry, would you give them a room to your resort? The answer would be no. You have the keys. Well, the same is true for your mind. We don't really think about the process of protecting our mind. And so what we do is we allow other people and things to get in our head. And what happens is we give our power away. So I say a lot of people spend their days being powerless, talking about things that they can't control, versus powerful. So going back to your point of spending time trying to change things that we can't, I always say true change occurs from the inside out. So if I want something out there to change, I have to change me first. Because if I change me, then I have the ability to influence other people. And honestly, 99% of things in life are out of our control. However, we can influence them. So you look at all the great leaders in history, Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, they didn't go out and tell people, you must do this. They said, watch me. I'm going to live the exact principles that I want other people to follow. And that's, to me, the definition of a leader.
I noticed you mentioned Martin Luther King Jr. And Gandhi, but you didn't mention Pierre Fauchard.
Never heard of him.
The first dentist in the world.
There you go.
Oh, my God. I didn't know there was anyone greater than that.
I didn't realize that.
That was pretty interesting. I never thought of it that way, that it's easier for me to sit around and complain about the government or the Verizon or North Korea. That's just easier than deal with my own demons.
Yeah, of course.
And I've also noticed, the number one business thing when you're hiring is like, I hire on attitude and I'll train the skill.
Exactly.
I don't want some guy with 10 years experience with a bad attitude. But when you look at attitude, it's really how you look at it. Because I have two different friends. One grew up with a father who's an alcoholic and was crazy and beat his children. So he's never had a drink in the world. I have another friend who's a complete crazy alcoholic, and he blames it because his dad was an alcoholic. So I'm like, here's two guys, my age, 55, alcoholics, and they both saw the same. Yeah. They both reacted differently.
Yeah. You mentioned attitude, and I often say that the most important thing we bring with us anywhere in life is our attitude, and it's a choice. It's not an easy choice, because what happens is we're conditioned or programmed over the years to believe certain things. So we see things. In fact, research shows that between 0 to 6 years of age, we're basically being imprinted with everything that we see. And so what happens is we start to create these stories in our mind. Like for me to believe that I'm not good enough, there would be no evidence to prove that to be true. But something happened in my life, or a series of events happened in my life, where I owned that belief. And I continued to believe that. And then other people would come along and say, no, look at this, you're great. But who am I going to believe? Them or what I've told myself a million times? So when you mention the difference between, I always say it's not the circumstances in life that determine our response. It's the response that determine future circumstances. So one is life controls me. One is life happens, and then I choose how to respond. And, unfortunately in our society, there's a lot of people blaming circumstances for the space that they're in. But I could list off 5 to 10 people that have really, really difficult circumstances that are some of the most powerful, positive people that I know, which proves right there it's not the circumstance. One of my favorite quotes, and I love quotes, so I say this about every quote, it's my favorite quote. Jim Rohn, famous leadership guru, he has a quote that says, "It's the set of the sails, not the direction of the wind, that determines which way we will go."
And I always call it the giggle factor. Was that the name of a book I read?
I don't know.
See, I'm so old at 55. I have thoughts in my head from books I don't remember reading, but I always thought it was very well. I've been very fortunate to have, I love travel. That's my number one. Yeah. Some families camp, some hunt, some do this, but me and my 4 boys have gone to 50 countries. That's our deal. And we don't own a boat or a cabin, or that's not our deal. And what I always thought was so bizarre, in the richest countries you go to, like United States, Germany, Japan, South Korea, they don't really seem that happy. No. And then you go to like really poor areas of like Kathmandu, Tasmania, Africa. Yeah. Not the island. Yeah. What's the island? The Tasmania.
Tasmania is the island, and then there's Tanzania.
Tanzania.
You go to Tanzania, you go to Brazil, you go to these really poor countries, and everything's giggling, everything's a family, and they're so poor, they all live in one house. So you live in a house with grandma, grandpa, extended family. So you live in a house with all your cousins, and it seems like you couldn't beat the giggling away from it. Then you go to like South Korea and Germany and the United States, and everybody's all in a hurry to have happiness and wealth and cars and gadgets and iPhones, and it's like, materialism doesn't really equate with happiness when you travel the world.
Right. And my whole thing is, we do live in a society of what's next. Like it's the treadmill of constantly searching for the next thing to fulfill me. But when you mention materialism, it's stuff doesn't fulfill your heart. Stuff fulfills your head. We're excited when we get something new. All of us are. You get a new car, you get a new, clothes, but it's temporary because eventually the newness wears off. And what do you want? More new stuff. So those people that you mentioned in the third world countries that they've actually proven that their happiness levels are higher than someone in a country like ours, one of the biggest reasons is because they're present to what they have. They spend a lot of time in gratitude. So you talked about the family and being grateful for the people that they have, being grateful for the opportunity to, have shelter, even though it's not the shelter we would consider to be shelter. That to me is one of the biggest factors in terms of what true happiness is. I tell people all the time, if you want to generate happiness, which is to me the best way to occur, have happiness occur, is to sit down momentarily and just choose to be grateful for the people and things that you have in your life. Instead of, I got to get the next thing. It's that my neighbor's got this, so now I need to one-up him. Or my friend got this. And social media is a big game of comparison. People are posting their highlights. I always say, when you compare yourself to someone on social media, you're comparing your game film to someone else's highlight reel.
And hasn't there been studies that the more time you spend on social media, the more depression you have?
I think there is. Yeah, I haven't actually read those studies, but
yeah. I feel like, oh my God, she's taking a vacation to London.
Absolutely.
And I'm taking a sleeping bag to Saguaro Lake.
Yeah, exactly. But it's an illusion because most people, when they post their highlights. They're not posting, I'm struggling with this, or we had a really difficult situation. It's, hey, look at me. We just went on a great vacation. I know personally, I posted pictures of my wife and I at different events, and there's a huge smile on my face. But I can tell you that an hour, 2 hours prior to that, there was a struggle going on in my head. I was experiencing anxiety or something like that. So people would look and say, oh, look at him. He's so happy. But yet nobody knows what's behind the mask. I use that term all the time. We're really good at faking. And to me, social media, I personally use social media as a way to influence other people. But I think that a lot of people use it as a cover-up for what's really going on. And that's my mission, is to get people to be real and vulnerable and to say, here's what I'm struggling with. The minute you can admit that, then you can create change. As long as you're faking and repressing, and guys are notorious for this, no, I'm okay, I'm good, repress. Whatever gets repressed will eventually get expressed. And so a lot of us are walking around with these years and years of repressed emotions instead of, let's talk about it and get it out. Emotions are meant to be expressed, not repressed.
And you see that in business.
Yeah.
When I graduated in dental school, they didn't teach you anything about business. So finally, after I was about ready to give up, I went back to ASU. I went to night school and got my MBA. And the most profound thing they said in marketing is they said that people, and a company is just a bunch of people, they're doing that. If their marriage is on the rocks, you're always posting pairs of marriage.
Yes.
If there's no raisins in Raisin Bran, they advertise 2 scoops of raisins in every box. If your car always breaks down, they advertise bumper-to-bumper warranty for 100,000 miles. You don't see any Japanese or German cars advertising warranties because their cars don't break down.
Right.
So when someone comes up to you, what they're selling. So their selling comes from a place of weakness. So if they always say, so it's a human condition that you can see in companies.
Yeah.
First of all, what will my homies find if they go to your website, Kaleido Eye? And I doubt you can spell kaleidoscope. I can. So Kaleido is K-A-L-E, so think of kale. And then Ido, think of iodine, I-D-O. Then your eyeball, E-Y-E. So kale, K-A-L-E, Ido, I. By the way, the best way to cook kale is use a lot of coconut oil. Yeah. That way, when you're done cooking it, it's easier to scrape into the trash.
There you go.
But the reason I spell it out real quick is because if you, I've had over 3 million downloads on iTunes. Yeah. 85% of them, they're commuting to work. So what podcasts like we're doing now is killing radio because radio, they're all saying the same thing. It's too toxic. Yeah. If I have an hour commute to work from Ahwatukee to downtown Phoenix, do you want to listen to Putin and Russia and Trump and Hillary and North Korea? Do you want to listen to that? Yeah. Or would you rather listen to some powerful, meaningful purpose from some guy in Ahwatukee? Yes. all these podcasts have one thing in common. You live and work and play in Ahwatukee. You're making Ahwatukee a better place. And so that's why I'm trying to spell it out, because they can't take notes. They're commuting.
Yeah.
Are you on Twitter?
You know what? Twitter is the one social media platform that I haven't figured out. To me, it's a massive ocean of confusion to me. So I'm on Instagram and Facebook. Those are my two. And
those are the two I'd recommend getting off of.
Yeah.
You know why?
Why?
Because Twitter and LinkedIn is a direct feed. If you have 100 followers on Twitter and you tweet, all 100 get it. Same on LinkedIn, same on Pinterest.
Yeah.
What Facebook did is you built a community, but now they won't push out your post to your community unless you boost the post and get money. Yeah. So if you build yourself on Facebook, you're always going to have to be boosting your post, so you always give them money. So I say buy the stock, because you're always giving them money. Twitter, you never give money, and then it went public at 40. Now it trades at 20. Yeah. Because they don't really, it wasn't a smart business. So, but podcasters, what they do is they retweet their guest, and then when they get to work or later, they say, "Oh, what did Joe Rogan? Who was he interviewed?" Yeah. And then they go to Joe Rogan, and they see the last tweet in the link. Yeah. So it's a way of just knowing in your mind. When I get to work, I just listen to Rogan for an hour, and I know who that guy is.
Yeah. Okay.
But anyway, sorry to interrupt.
No, so back to the name. Funny story, when I first chose this name, because originally when I started this business, it was AZ Yelp, which stood for Youth Exemplifying Leadership Principles.
AZ Yelp?
Try explaining that to a group of 10-year-olds. And then people would say, "Oh, you work for Yelp.com." And I thought, okay, so I hired a business strategist.
What does it stand for?
Youth Exemplifying Leadership Principles.
Wow.
So I hired a business strategist, and we actually came up with the name Kaleido, because my whole thing is about creativity and innovation. The very first, within a month of choosing this name, I put it up on the board. I was working with a group of 10 to 12-year-olds, and I said, "Does anyone have any idea what this means?" And this girl raised her hand, and she said, "Is your wife's name Kale?" And I looked at her, and I said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "Oh, I thought you chose that name because it says Kale, I do. And you said I do when you married her. Isn't that great?" I thought that's a creative answer.
I thought of iodine.
There you go. So going back to your original question, the bulk of my work, so when I first started this business, my mission was to change the face of education. I wanted to make emotional intelligence a part of every child's curriculum experience. Because as a former teacher, I taught for 10 years, I felt like that was the biggest missing piece. A lot of people argue about different things that are missing from education. To me, it's the life and leadership piece. It's the heart education versus the head education. We're educating these kids' heads a ton, but yet we're not really addressing the heart issues. So 9 years ago when I started this, my goal was to get this into every classroom. Well, I realized pretty quickly that I'm up against one of the bigger bureaucracies in the world, and I wasn't going to necessarily change the face of education. So within the last 3 or 4 years, I've just kind of allowed it to grow where it's a surrender moment where I say, "God, put me where you know that I need to be." And so what I've done is now transition from just working with schools to doing life coaching with kids. So I coach kids from 8 to even 24 years old. And I hesitate to use the word life coaching because I think sometimes that's overused. I call it empowerment coaching because it's not counseling, it's not therapy. I have a curriculum and I'm going to teach you and empower you to go live these skills. I also do breakout sessions at national, regional conferences. I have just started doing business training with corporations, sales staffs, because the beautiful thing about the concepts that I teach is emotional intelligence principles are universal. I could teach a a kindergartner and my 97-year-old grandma the same concepts. The context of their life is just going to be different. And then the last piece that I'm really starting to gain a lot of traction on now is working with athletes. So I do a lot of mental toughness training with athletes. I just had a chance to visit the San Jose State baseball team in California. This was my first experience with college athletes, and to be honest with you, I was fearful because I thought my wheelhouse has been kids. Are these guys going to listen to what I have to say? And they absolutely ate it up, because sometimes coaches get really skill specific. They're experts at teaching athletic skills, but they forget that these are kids as well, that have stuff just like any of us. They got stuff going on. So if you can help them to address the emotional piece, how much better can they be on the playing field? And it's, more and more research is now proving. I think it was Yogi Berra that said that the game of baseball is 90% mental and the other half mental. So,
Nice.
You could be the most gifted athlete, and you see this all the time, but if they're not managing the 6 inches between their ears, then the athletic skills are compromised and they can't reach full potential.
One of my most favorite quotes, I raised 4 boys. It is easier to build strong children than to repair broken men.
Absolutely.
Frederick Douglass.
Yes.
And so many people realize you need to put all your resources in the youth, because if you wait till they're in jail and now you're trying to, they didn't finish high school, substance abuse, they live below the poverty line, that's hard to fix.
Yeah.
So the better return on investment is, what can you do for youth? What is that why you targeted youth first, because it's easier to fix youth than to repair broken men?
And I hesitate to use the word fix, because I always tell people there's nothing inherently wrong with you. Like there's no fixing. To me, it's addressing areas that are preventing you from being the person that you want. Because if you mention the word fix to someone, what do they immediately think? I'm broken. Which, we are broken. We're broken people. However, if you come to people with the essence of, hey, you're broken, I'm going to fix you, and I would never say that, it's an immediate defensiveness. So to me, my whole approach is, there's a difference between being a sage on the stage or a guide on the side. Sometimes people with a lot of knowledge have this, hey, listen to me, I've got the answers.
Again, it's easier to be
a sage on the stage.
How did that quote? Sorry, it's easier to be.
Well,
I interrupt you.
Well, people with lots of knowledge. I have a ton of knowledge about emotional intelligence. I've spent the last 9 years reading and researching about these concepts. So it would be easy for me to be a sage on the stage and to walk into a classroom or a boardroom or a living room and to say, hey, I got all the answers. I'm up here, you're down here, listen to me. Versus, hey, I've got some answers, but I'm in the same game you are, called the game of life. Let's sit down together in the trenches, and I will guide you to reaching your full potential.
So how would you say that quote? It's easier to be a sage on the stage than
a guide on the side.
Than a guide on the side. Yeah, I loved your...
Yeah. I think quotes are, they're short, they're sweet, and they capture... you could read a quote and get the same message than reading a 50-page article or book on that same message. I'm a big fan of quotes.
So it's easier to build strong children. You said something. My job is to try to guesstimate what they might be answering. But you said emotional intelligence, but most people think of IQ, intelligent quotient, not EQ, emotional quotient. So what is the difference between an intelligent quotient and an emotional quotient? What's the difference in doing good on my SAT exam to get into U of A?
Yep, great question. So I use the metaphor of a vehicle. So every car we drive has 2 sets of wheels. You got the back set, you got the front set. The back set of wheels is the IQ. It's the foundation. You need it. You need content. I'm not saying that schools should obliterate core content. What I am saying is if we just address the intellectual quotient, which I feel like in a lot of cases we're doing, we're inundating them with curriculum. Learn this, memorize this, regurgitate this. Meanwhile, the front set of wheels is the emotional intelligence. It's where we steer. So you could have a student, and I had these students who were extremely gifted academically, but yet in life skills, they were struggling. So to me, it's the combination. Smart is school smart plus self-smart. So I could be extremely school smart, but when I finish school and I go into a work environment, I have to communicate with people. Now I have to deal with adversity and meet deadlines. Well, what's going to come into play? How I manage myself. Not, how I, know this content and I was a 4-point student. And there's a wonderful example of Harvard. About 5 years ago, a professor at Harvard created a class called The Science of Happiness. Now, most people would say, well, this is the most educated group of kids in the world. They're already smart. Why would they sign up for a class called The Science of Happiness? Well, it ended up being the highest attended class ever in the history of Harvard. And I ask people all the time, what does that say about these students? They had plenty of the school smarts. They were clamoring for learning about, how do I generate happiness? How do I handle myself? How do I deal with adversity? They had no clue how to do that because it wasn't taught to them. What was taught is the core content, but that's only going to get you so far in life. I have students now that were really bright students in my class, and it's been it's a rewarding to watch them grow in life. But some of the ones that struggled to get the A's and maybe didn't get A's and got B's and C's, they're just as successful, if not more successful in life, because they took the time to educate themselves about how to manage me.
So what was the name of that class?
The Science of Happiness.
Did it include cooking bacon?
I don't think so.
Really?
That might have been maybe part of the curriculum.
I imagine that course used to be based on bacon. Yeah, one of my what I think is bizarre, because I know teachers are overwhelmed. They only have so many hours. But it is bizarre when you see kids coming home and they graduate and they know algebra, geometry, trig, and calculus, but they don't know anything about raising a baby or that it's not, or this, when you talk to the Fortune 500 companies like Intel, as when I was getting my MBA, they were asking the companies, what do you need from us? Mm-hmm. And the instructors were saying that every class had to have a team project, because they said the worst thing it was is when some PhD walked in there and he lived in a cubicle in a library for 5 years and he can't work with anyone else. Yeah. Well, Intel has tens of thousands of employees, so they told the MBA school every course, no matter what it's on, has to have a team project, because you need to teach these 5 bookworms how to communicate and get along and play nice in the sandbox.
Yeah. No, it's true. And I talk to a lot of people that are business owners, and one of the things that I constantly hear is they're wanting to hire creative, innovative minds. But sometimes the system of education is creating standardized minds. That's one of my biggest frustrations is, I'm not anti-standardized tests. I think there's a time and a place. But from the time I left the classroom until now, the amount of standardized testing and the emphasis on standardized testing has skyrocketed. And my whole thing is, okay, you give the kid a standardized test, but does that equate to success in life? We get so caught up in this education system, not thinking about what happens beyond education. They're going to leave school at some point, and yes, they're going to have this content knowledge, but is a standardized test, which is essentially read and regurgitate, preparing them for the rigors of life? And my answer is no.
And everything they tell you to believe, you just don't see the evidence. Like they say, you get a college education. Exactly. It's so important. Well, all the billionaires, Bill Gates dropped out of college.
Yes.
Steve Jobs only went to one class.
Yes.
Mark Zuckerberg dropped out of college. And with stock portfolio, if you go to every local Edward Jones in Ahwatukee, they say you need to diversify your stock. That's funny. Every billionaire only owns one stock, the company he works at.
Yeah.
And then you have academic versus religious issues. Like I grew up in Catholic school, from grammar school, high school, college, and they would say you're being selfish. And then you go take a business class at Creighton, and they'd say, no, he's following his own self-interest. Yeah. It's like, well, is he selfish or following his own self? Yeah. So these young kids get so many mixed messages. But what I want to focus on this is, let's bring it home just to Ahwatukee. What are you doing in Ahwatukee? Is it mostly kids? Is it mostly lecturing? What are you doing here?
So a lot of it, and I'm grateful for having the opportunity to both of the schools that I taught in were in Ahwatukee. I taught for 4 years at Esperanza.
And where's Esperanza?
Esperanza is, you're speaking to a geographically challenged individual here. It's Mountain
Park Loop?
Yeah.
Esperanza?
Yeah, Esperanza. And then Estrella is just down the street from Desert Vista.
So my boys, Australia was 1 to 6?
K to 5.
K to 5.
And then Akimal was 6 to 8.
Yeah, so my 4 boys went to Australia.
Okay.
And then they went through Akimal.
They might have been there when I was there.
And then they all went through Desert Vista.
I started
Ryan,
there.
what year did you
2000.
graduate?
2011.
Ryan, does it depress you that your father doesn't know the year you graduated from high school?
See, you might have been in Australia when I was there.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
No way,
you did.
No way.
I started there in 2000.
I had Miss Lowe, Miss Giannopoulos, Miss Jensen, and Mr. Caldwell.
Okay, yeah.
2nd through 5th.
Mr. Caldwell and I were teaching mates.
Love Mr. Caldwell.
Yeah.
No way?
Yeah.
You must have taught my class
Yeah.
teacher. Oh my God.
Yeah, I taught the social studies.
That's
yeah.
awesome. That's crazy.
Yeah,
Couple
wow.
circle, huh?
Yeah. So Australia.
By the way, big shout out to Mr. Caldwell. He really touched you.
Yeah.
I mean,
All four of us had it.
yeah, they all. And then who was the wrestling coach in middle school?
Mr. Burkhart.
Mr. Burkhart.
Yeah.
You guys would always tell me pumped up motivational stuff from Mr. Burkhart and Mr. Caldwell.
That's awesome. Cool. So 4 years at Estrella, 4 years at Esperanza, and then since I left the classroom, a lot of my contract work with schools has been through Kyrene, which I would have never guessed. I expected to, maybe have a black eye, so to speak, or he, sometimes there's these questions of why is he leaving, and you just never know how it's going to pan out. But Dr. Schauer, who was the former superintendent, really saw the vision in what I taught.
Now, is the superintendent today when I was little, was the principal?
No, superintendent is the entire district.
Oh, a superintendent's a district.
It's the principal of the entire district, basically.
Okay, so the principal, so each one of these...
Each school has a
grammar,
principal.
middle school, high school
Yes.
has a principal.
Yep,
But a
administrator.
superintendent is...
Oversees the entire district.
And
yes.
Kyrene's mostly Ahwatukee and Tempe?
Ahwatukee, Tempe, and I believe there's a couple in Chandler.
Okay.
I'd have to... Yeah, I know there is, because, yeah.
So you're talking about the superintendent over the whole Kyrene school?
Yeah.
Is he still there?
No,
Okay,
there's
well-
a new superintendent, but he really saw the vision of, incorporating something that was non-academic. And so he introduced me to several principals who then allowed me to come in. A couple of them were pilot, and I'm grateful for that, because I always say that the classroom is kind of a laboratory for me, where I get to create and try new lessons and see how things land. So a lot of the work that I do now with Ahwatukee schools is character days. Traditionally what schools do is they bring in a speaker and they have them do an assembly. I am not a fan of assemblies, because it's a rah, speak to you a half an hour, 45 minutes, get you fired up, and then the kids go back to the class and the teacher says, what did you learn? And they're like, I don't know, I had fun, I clapped, and I was having a great time. So what I try to do is I create the assembly atmosphere in the classroom. So when I go to a school, I want to be there the entire day, and I want the administration to put me wherever they choose to put me. Typically, they choose the upper grades. 3rd through 5th is kind of the...
Those are upper grades?
K through 2 is primary.
Okay.
3 through 5 is intermediate.
K to 2 is primary, and 3 to 5 is what?
Intermediate.
Intermediate.
Yeah.
And then what? Then middle school is
6
6 to 9 or 6 to 8.
6 to 8. High school 9 to 12.
9 to 12.
Yeah.
I didn't know they had kindergartens. I don't think they had kindergartens back when they were little. Did you go?
I went to kindergarten. I went to preschool, kindergarten first.
Yeah, but was the kindergarten at
Estrella?
Australia?
No, I actually went to Tesseract for kindergarten, first grade.
There you go.
But the school, did they always have kindergarten, or is that a newer thing?
As far as I know, yeah. It used to be half day, but see now with the race to the top mentality, the high stakes testing, we get kindergartners all day now. It's a full day kindergarten. I don't even think they offer half day anymore.
And when I grew up, my birthday is August 29th. That was still always school out.
Yeah.
And the love-hate about my birthday was, it's my birthday, but then the following week school would start.
That's right.
Now these kids, on my birthday, they've already been in school a couple weeks.
Yep. So I did a lot of work I do a lot of work with the schools. Some of them are long-term contracts where I'll go in and they'll contract me for, let's say, 10 different lessons, which really is ideal, because I can go in and teach, a lesson, but the power in this content is really building on previous skills. You can create a little bit of change. In fact, I've had wonderful feedback from kids. I was just at Esperanza, in fact, last week, and I finished a lesson. It was a 30-minute lesson, and I was walking out of the room, and this boy walked up to me, and this is what makes this work so rewarding. He looked me in the eye and he said, "You changed my life today." Isn't that awesome?
That is
and that
awesome.
makes it all, you hear people say, if you just change one person, I think, yeah, but I want to change everyone. But when you hear something like that, and it's meaningful, it's from the heart, that just gives me fuel to want to do more.
And that my favorite quote, growing up Catholic, my two favorite saints were Martin Luther,
Yeah.
who Martin Luther King was named after.
Yeah.
And then Mother Teresa.
Yeah.
And Mother Teresa always said, well, if you can't feed 100 poor people, feed one.
Exactly.
So if you can't change every little boy's life in the planet, change one.
Yeah.
And changing one is amazing.
Yeah.
Back to your website. You do contract work for schools.
Yeah.
Like you'll do 10 sessions.
Yep.
But you do private stuff too.
Yeah.
Because I know
Coaching.
people where you coach
Yep.
their children.
Yep. So it's
Talk about that. Is that half of your life? Is that just a a little part, or is it 50-50?
A lot of it depends on the time of year. The coaching kind of comes and goes. Like right now, I'm coaching probably 10 kids.
But and what is their age range? Age range usually
8 to 24.
8 to 24.
Yeah.
So are you? I mean, I don't know if Brian, but I mean, what is the average case? I mean, like if you went to McDonald's, their average case is a hamburger, fried, and Coke.
Yeah.
You go to the dentist, the average case is a cleaning exam and X-ray. What is your average case?
In terms of their struggles?
Yeah, yeah. Why are they calling you as a coach? What are you coaching them to do?
It's a lot of it, and
it's so individual.
It comes down to self-confidence. It comes down to, there might be peripheral things that the parents say, oh, they're having trouble here, here, and here. But what I feel like the beauty of coaching, what I can do as a coach that I can't do in a classroom, is I can look at the individual person and peel back the layers of getting to the core of what's really going on. So a lot of kids will say, well, I'm really mad at this person. I'm really mad at my coach, my teacher. And really what it comes down to is I'm struggling with me. I'm struggling with believing in who I am, or with, middle school. I call middle school time the figuring out who I am space. But unfortunately, a lot of those kids are trying to be somebody else. I call it the social mirror. Instead of looking in the mirror and saying, who do I want to be? It's looking in the social mirror and saying, oh, that's cool. That's popular. I'll go do that. Instead of, wait a minute, I'm going to look inside. Because going back to what I said in the beginning, true change is from the inside out. So we could go and change the teacher and the coach but if we change them, you're not going to change. You have to change yourself in order to start to manage some of those. And I tell parents all the time, if your child has a tough teacher, tough coach, that's actually a blessing. What a lot of parents want to do is say, get that kid out of that class and put them in another class. Well, how does that translate into life? If you have a tough boss, what are you going to quit? You going to go ask for a new boss? No, it's called adversity. How do you work through that? There's a lot of it comes down to just the thoughts, the beliefs that they've created over the years. There's a wonderful story of Michelangelo when he sculpted the statue of David. The people came rushing to see what he had done, and they kept saying, how did you create this beautiful masterpiece from this giant block of marble? And he said it was actually simple. All I did was chip away at who David wasn't to reveal who he was.
Nice.
Yeah. So, and I feel like that's what I do. Kids recognize, okay, this belief you're having, that's not you. This I'm not good enough, yeah, I had that one too. That's not you. This I'll never be good at math. I'll never make the team. That's not you. Let's peel back the layers, chip away, and get to the core of who you are.
And are your clients the youth? You said they're between 18 to 24. Are they
8 and 24?
8 and 24.
Yeah.
Are they all boys, all girls?
Boys,
50-50?
girls.
Because the reason I asked, because your book is called Seriously Dad,
Yep.
An Empowering Conversation That Will Change Your Lens on Life.
Yes.
By Mike Sissel. And where can they buy this book?
You can purchase it on Amazon. I actually self-published that book through Amazon, so it's a real simple. It's $10 on Amazon.
And who's Maria Boas?
She is actually my wife has published 3 books, children's books, and the gal that helped her to start the process of publishing, she owns a small publishing company in Arizona. It's her daughter, who's a great illustrator.
So you have a contact of someone who self-publishes or helps you publish?
She didn't help me. She helped my wife. She does a lot of Catholic publishing. She publishes book for the Catholic.
Are they all books on guilt?
No. And then so she helped my wife. My wife has written 3 books. She helped her kind of get that process started. But the Seriously Dad book, I tell people all the time, it's written as a conversation between a father and his 13-year-old daughter. However, it's not gender specific. It's not age specific. I have an actual former student who, she's a graduate student now, I think at U of A. And when I first got the manuscript, I was reaching out to people saying, hey, will you read this? And I put something on Facebook. She said, I'd love to read it. And she said, I read this twice and it made a huge difference for me. And
Was it a powerful enough difference that she could get into ASU? Or did
good
she have to
question.
stay at U of A?
I don't know. Hopefully she's not watching.
That would have been the true sign.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I say it because you were a Beaver.
Oregon State, yes. That's right.
So I had 5 sisters, and some went to K-State, and some went to KU.
Okay.
So it's just a fun.
Yeah.
I don't know why I want the Cardinals to beat all the other football teams.
Oh,
Right. It's just silly.
Right.
Silly tribalism.
Right.
So this is Ahwatukee Uncensored. So what does this cost? What if someone's listening and says, I want you to coach my kid? How does that cost?
So a lot of it depends. So you talking about just coaching?
Yeah, or what you're doing, yeah.
Okay, so
private coaching.
Yeah, so the private coaching, typically I like to sell it in 8 sessions. I can do individual sessions. I can do 2 or 3 sessions, but I like to do it over the course of 8 sessions. That way we can really build on and create. My goal is to create sustainable change, not temporary change. So for an 8-week, 8 session over the course of whatever time the parents choose, it's $750. Which ends up being less than $100 an hour. And if you're going to go to a counselor or a therapist, you're probably going to pay a little bit more than that. And I'm not bashing on counselors or therapists, but there's a big difference between coaching and therapy. I've actually, there are times when I have to refer people and say, you know what, this isn't my deal. I think you should go see a counselor. But then at the same time, there are kids that have seen counselors and it didn't just work for them. And so they wanted someone that was more of a, and to me, the biggest difference in coach, I have a curriculum. So it's not just sit down, tell me about things that are going on. It's I'm going to teach you a lesson, and then we're going to apply this lesson to your life. That's where the guide on the side piece comes in. So let me teach you a lesson. Like first lesson is, what is leadership? And so we talk about, what do you think leadership is? And most kids say, well, a leadership is a position of authority. It's a boss. It's an owner. And I said, okay, that's a myth. You have leader on your business card. That does not make you a leader. You are a CEO of a company. That does not make you a leader. To me, and I say this all the time, leadership is not a position. It's a disposition. So in my opinion, we all lead. And that's not like a kumbaya, woohoo, we all lead, isn't this great? It's you lead yourself first. And then by leading you are influencing other people. John Maxwell, my favorite leadership guru, talks about leadership being influence. That's it. He says leadership is influence, nothing more, nothing less. So I don't need a title to be a leader. I need to lead myself. I always say to kids, you are the CIO of your life, the Chief Influencing Officer. CIO, Chief Influencing Officer. So it's not about, and I think anyone watching has had experiences where they had a boss that was motivated by power and authority and control, and nobody responds to that. That's micromanaging, right? People get defensive and like, wait a minute. But yet some people have had a boss that leads themselves and basically says, anything I'm asking you to do, I'm going to live that principle as well. That to me is someone I would want to work for. That's the essence of leadership. It's I'm going to lead me, and then I will influence you to do the same.
I love that, because like in business, like a manager is someone who says, if you're 5 minutes late, I'll write you up.
Yeah.
A leader is someone who makes you want to be early.
Yeah.
But I think the true test of leadership is, can they lead from the grave? I mean, like you mentioned, Martin Luther King.
Your legacy, yeah.
And who else did you mention?
Gandhi. Yeah.
So these people are dead, and they're still influencing
absolutely.
humanity to be better.
Absolutely.
Where's the manager today to stand over there, the ruler, saying, if you're late, I'll fire you, or I'll write you up.
Yeah.
And these guys are influencing from the grave.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That is amazing.
That's legacy, and that's my hope. Is I don't do this to build me up. I do this to serve others.
So you said there's 8 lessons. The first one was on leadership.
So what there is so I have 10. They're called 10 core coaching principles. Okay. I'm not a big fan of creating a curriculum per se, because I like to have foundational principles that I can use to create. I mean, I could take my 10 core coaching principles and create 150 lessons, because there's that much content. So the principles I use as kind of a guide. So the first lesson is we all lead. The second lesson is stay in your driver's zone.
Stay in your driver's zone?
Stay in your driver's zone, which means identify what you can and can't control. So at the very beginning of this piece, we were talking about, things we hear in the media and things that, if you can recognize that something is out of your control, then you can go back into your driver's zone and control what you can control, which to me is 3 things: your thoughts, your feelings, and your emotions. So if I can't control that person, can I control the way I think about that person? right? Or if I can't control, so for example, somebody cuts me off on the freeway. Natural reaction is to get angry, honk the horn, yell obscenities at the person, right? What we could do, and I'm not saying everybody does this perfectly, and I struggle with this sometimes too, is to say, okay, the guy that just cut me off, who I can't even see anymore, passenger zone, I cannot control what that guy just did. So am I going to allow his choice to control the rest of my day and allow me to be angry, which would not only influence me, but my family, the people I work with? Or can I go back into my driver's zone and say, I'm thankful that I'm safe? Or I wonder if that person was rushing to the hospital to, take care of someone that was about to. See, we get stuck in our judgments. So the name of my program is called Lenses of Leadership. So I always say the lens through which you view the world will greatly affect the quality of your life. But what we do is we use a lens and we say, well, it's my lens, so I must be right. They're mean, they're rude. I'll give you a great example. I hear kids all the time saying, well, that teacher's mean. My parents are mean. My friend is mean. And I'll say, okay, take a step back and try this lens on. Have you ever thought about your teacher or your parents or your friends and what they're experiencing beyond what you see? And they kind of look at you like, what do you mean? Have you ever thought about the fact that they might have personal things that they don't discuss in class that's affecting their heart? And then it starts to get, to me, one of the most lacking skills in our society is empathy. It's the ability to consider someone else's perspective. And a lot of us don't want to do that because it's an ego thing. If I consider their perspective, I'm admitting I'm wrong, which is not the case. To me, it's I have my perspective and I value you enough to allow you to have the space to share. I don't have to agree with it, but I give you the dignity that you deserve. That's really, to me, empathy is, if I could just teach one skill, it would be that.
Yeah, and I think back to business, I think entrepreneur comes from empathy, because I think that true entrepreneurs, they have empathy for a person. They say, she can't open that lid, or she can't get up that stairway, and
assess the needs.
And I want to create a business, a service, a product to help you.
Yeah, well, and that's why I started what I started. I was in the classroom for 10 years, and I saw these kids coming to school with an emotional backpack that was not addressed. See, they bring their physical backpack and it's overflowing with stuff. Get out your books, get out your pencils, get out your binders. Oh, by the way, if you had a struggle at home, if you're dealing with something up here, sorry, we got stuff to do. And I started to see that more and more, and I thought, okay, that kid that just failed that test, would he have failed that test if he had some emotional intelligence training about how to manage what just happened at home? Not fix it, not control it, but at least have somebody to talk to or have a tool to work through that. I hear administrators all the time say, we love what you do, but you know what, we just don't have time, we just don't have money. And what a lot of them, they don't say this, but the bottom line, just like the bottom line in business sometimes is money, the bottom line in education right now is test scores.
Right.
And if they want to increase test scores, there's two choices. You can continue to add more curriculum, or you can get to the core. People say common core. I say the real common core is the child's heart. If you can help a child address what's hindering them from learning, test scores are going to naturally improve. But you can't quantify it. Like people all the time say, where's your data? Show me the data that your curriculum works. And I have survey results, I have spreadsheets, but to me the most powerful data is like the kid that came up and said, you changed my life today. You can't put that on a spreadsheet. But I guarantee you that kid, the trajectory of his life is different than when I walked into that classroom.
And it was Jimmy Carter who started the Department of Education, right?
Mm-hmm.
And since then, the federal government's been giving you all kinds of this stuff to do. Mm-hmm. And I always think to myself, why is somebody in Washington, D.C. telling Kyrene School District how to teach our kids?
You ask any teacher that question, that strikes a nerve, because the people that are making the legislative decisions don't step foot in classrooms.
I know.
The teachers are in the trenches.
And what was America's ranking in education when Jimmy Carter started the Department of Education, and what is it now?
Yeah. I know it's like 17 or 18.
Yeah, and what was it when Jimmy started?
I'm not sure.
It was way up here.
Yeah.
And then they've been ruining it.
Yeah.
And if you said, I want to help schools, I'm going to close down the Department of Education, people say, my God, you're anti-education.
Yeah.
And it's like, my analogy with it is, what if we had a Department of Federal fast food hamburger joints? We just had one McDonald's. There would be no Burger King and In-N-Out and Wendy's, and you're not allowed to improvise for your community's needs and services.
And you know what? It's interesting because people really get the need for what I'm teaching. I'm not saying I'm the only one. There's a lot of people doing similar work, and they're doing great things. But when I speak with parents, when I speak with teachers, even administrators, they know in their heart that this is needed, but they're stuck in a system. It's like, you know what? We got 90 minutes of math, 90 minutes of reading, 90 minutes of writing. Where do we fit you in? And that's the product.
I just think it would be like, I just think it'd be so insulting if the federal government told me if you needed a filling, an inlay, an onlay, or a crown.
Yeah, yeah.
And I just think it's horribly insulting for someone to tell a teacher from 3,000 miles away what to do.
Well, so here's a little insight. When I was teaching, my greatest gift as a teacher was my ability to innovate and be creative. So I could take a lesson the way it was in the cookie cutter lesson and say, no, that's not going to work. I know how to reach my students. But as my years progressed in the system, I became more and more robotic. It was, no, you teach this way. We'll tell you when to teach it, how to teach it, what to teach. And my whole thing was, wait a minute, you've just now stomped on my gift. You've told me now, and a lot of teachers agree with this, you're telling me what to teach, when to teach, how to teach, but what if I had a way that reached my students who I know intimately more than anybody else? I can't, because this is what the curriculum says.
And your student in your class might be totally different than the student for the teacher next door.
Yeah, exactly.
And what is the number one 911 call from Ahwatukee, Tempe, every city of every state of all time?
I don't know.
Domestic violence.
Yeah.
So you're trying to teach a kid algebra, and last night he watched his drunk dad beat the hell out of his mom. Fire departments, every fire department I talk to, only 10% of their calls are fire.
Yeah.
90% are health related, and other emergencies. So it'd be hard to teach a kid algebra if last night his mom called 911.
Yeah.
So number one was leadership. Number two was the driver zone. Number three?
Number three would be change your lens, change your life. So it's the essence of just describing to them what a lens means. So I always use the example, when you go to an eye doctor, they run you through the series of tests and they say 1 or 2, 1 or 2, and they do that multiple times. Why are they doing that? To get you the perfect prescription so that you can see clearly. Like I have contacts. I've got the great prescription so that I can see clearly. If I take them out, I can't. The same analogy applies to the mind sight. So I go into classrooms, I work with kids, I work with adults, and I say, you get to be your own personal, not eye doctor, but mind doctor. So you get to assess, the 1, the 2, 1, 2. Is the thought that you're having right now about this situation, is it serving you or is it stopping you? If it's stopping you, why hold on to that thought? If it's causing you anger or frustration or jealousy or guilt, is that an emotion that you want to have? Now, I make it very clear that feeling an emotion like anger, frustration, guilt, those are not bad emotions. Those are natural human emotions. I feel them, you feel them, we all feel them. But the question is, what are you going to do with that energy? So I always say emotions are energy and motion. So when anger shows up, you have a choice. Are you going to allow anger to hold on, which means you're keeping the same lens, or are you going to shift your perspective and allow the anger to become curiosity? Allow the jealousy to become confidence. Everything begins with the way that we think. So thoughts influence feelings, feelings influence actions. So what a lot of times we do, and as parents and as teachers, we default to this, punish the behavior. What are you doing? Stop doing that. Instead of, hey, you know what? Let's sit down and talk about what was your thought process. Oh, well, I thought, okay, what if you thought this? Now you've just given them the gift of self-awareness, self-management, and now you don't need to punish the behavior, you can empower them to say, hey, change your lens. I hear people, it's really cool to have kids go home and teach that concept to their parents. In fact, I had a kid who was at a stoplight with his mom, and his mom was driving, he was in the passenger seat, and his mom was yelling at the stoplight, gosh, I wish that would stop. And he said, Mom, you can't control that red light, but you can change your lens about it. And I thought, wow, that's beautiful. So he gave his mom an invitation to say, okay, you're yelling at the red light isn't changing it. But what if you stopped and said, okay, this red light staying red is preventing me from an accident in about 2 minutes. I'm grateful for the red light. Most people wouldn't necessarily think to do that, but it's a muscle. The more you practice that skill, the easier it becomes. I tell people all the time that growing up, I was a pretty pessimistic, worst case scenario person. I would not be the person that you would label as Mr. Positive. But now I've exercised that for so long that I still sometimes default to the negativity, worst case scenario, but I realize I have a choice. I can stay stuck there, or I can choose a new lens and move in the right direction. Here's another simple example. I was at Sprouts a couple months ago with my oldest daughter. She's 10. And a woman cut me off in the lane to get into line. And I said, I can't believe she did that. That's so rude. My daughter looked at me and said, Daddy, maybe she's having a tough day. And I thought, wow. She just gave me a new lens that allowed me to stop being angry and to now be curious. If we could all practice that, there wouldn't be so much hate and, blaming and complaining and finger pointing. If people could just step back and say, okay, this is out of my control. I can't change them. I can't change any human being by me trying to control them. But what I can do is change them by me changing myself. And then they will be a product of my influence, not my control.
That is beautiful. Change your lens, change your life. What would number 4 be?
Your mindset towards others. So a lot of kids, and this is where the athletic piece comes in. If I'm an athlete, I'm by nature competitive. Athletes love to compete. But when athletes walk into a classroom setting, is a classroom setting designed for competition? I would say no. Although sometimes the way we've created schools are notorious for saying our kids scored this, and this. And what does that do? It promotes competition. I think the classroom should be designed for cooperation. So what I say is there's 2 different mindsets towards others. There's me against you. So everything I do needs to be better than you. Or it's me and you, which is I want to make you better. And how do I make you better? By making me better. So I want kids to walk into a classroom and instead of saying, I got to get a 95 if they get a 92, it's I'm going to do the best I can. And that way that will encourage and inspire them to do better as well. But it's a huge shift. And athletes especially, because they come from this, win at all costs sometimes environment, win, and then you come into the classroom and it's like, hey, I got to be better than all of you. Well, what's the cost of that? If I had a kid in my class, I'm a 5th grader, and I've got a kid in my class trying to be better than me, do I want to have a relationship with that kid? No. And then those kids wonder, why does nobody want to hang out with me? Because you're constantly distancing yourself from other people by saying, I need to be better than you. So it's me against you versus me and you.
Yeah, I always wondered how sports affect children different from putting your kid in a team sport, like soccer, versus an individual sport, like swimming or wrestling or boxing or.
I think every kid should have the opportunity to play sports, regardless of their athletic ability, because there's so many lessons that they learn that they can't learn necessarily in a classroom. They're learning communication. They're learning how to take instruction from an adult. They're learning how to deal with adversity. They're learning how to overcome, hey, maybe I'm not the best at this, but how can I make the most of this? But again, the danger in sports, youth sports today is probably more competitive than it's ever been. But I always say, instead of using a measuring stick, use the mirror. So if I'm using a measuring stick between me and another player on my team, I'm constantly gauging where I am compared to them. If I'm using a mirror, I'm looking at me and saying, I'm going to be better than that guy was yesterday. To me, the mirror is a more powerful source of growth than constantly, because here's what's going to happen. If you're gauging your ability to someone else, you're going to ride what I call the emotional roller coaster. One day I'm better than them, then I'm not. I'm devastated. Then I'm happy, then I'm devastated. Then I'm happy, then I'm devastated. There's a wonderful picture of Michael Phelps when he swam in the, 2016, last year? Summer Olympics, 100-meter butterfly. The Chad Leclos, his opponent, was actually favored to win the race. And in the butterfly, you swim and you breathe looking forward. Leclos was in the lane next to him, and he was swimming. They caught this image halfway through the race, and Leclos was breathing off to the side. And I show that to kids, and I say, what was he doing? He was taking himself out of his race into Phelps's race, and part of that is why he lost the race, because he didn't stay in his lane. He used Michael Phelps as a gauge as opposed to, I'm going to swim the best race I can. So when I work with athletes, I always use that analogy of it's okay to gauge every now and then, like, okay, this person's here, I'd love to get there, back to my lane. Oh, now they're here and I'm here, back to my lane. But the more I get stuck in the, this kind of stuff, there's no possible way for me to compete at my full potential because I'm competing compared to someone else.
I always said, who's the fastest runner in the world in the 100 meter?
Usain Bolt.
Yeah, and no one will ever know how fast he could run because as soon as he passed the last guy, he would be looking back. And I'm like, if you would have stayed focused, you might have set your world record might last longer.
Yeah, it's true.
Because he was always looking back. And you mentioned sports, and that's really turned upside down. I can't believe we went over an hour, or our show's an hour, and we're already at an hour 3. But I think sports is really troubling. I hear so many moms and dads because, I mean, it's so old school. I mean, like in boxing, a boxer won't hit a brick wall as hard as he can. So he wraps up in 60 ounces of padding and then bashes on your head, giving you concussions.
Yeah.
In rugby, where there's no helmet, you would never dive head first and tackle someone.
Yeah.
But you put on a helmet, and they're thinking, well, the helmet needs to be bigger and bigger and bigger. The helmet is the problem. The pad on the if you took the gloves off the boxer's hand, if he hit your head as hard as he could, he'd break his hand.
Yeah.
If you took the helmet off at Mountain Point and these football teams, they wouldn't get concussions. But see, it's so counterintuitive because you say, no, the helmet protects from concussion. No, the helmet causes concussion because it forces you to use your head as a weapon. And then even soccer is crazy. Yeah. Soccer, you're not allowed to use your hands. Yeah. They're saving your hands, and then you're bouncing this ball on your head. And it's going to be weird because even retired NFL players in Ahwatukee don't want to put their kids in football, soccer, boxing. So it's almost like we're going to have to... And what is the chance you could go down to Brazil and say, you can no longer use your head?
Yeah.
I mean, that'd be like...
Right.
I mean, what's the chance you could get that passed?
Yeah. No, I'm...
1 in 8 trillion?
I'm thankful that I have 2 girls because honestly, I was a football player and I wouldn't want to have to make that choice if I had
Well, they could play rugby.
Yeah, there you go.
They could play rugby, and it's so counterintuitive. Yeah. You're like, no, the boxing will protect everything they do to protect. It's either protecting the wrong body part or making it used as a weapon.
And that's going back to what I originally said. The most precious real estate we own is the 6 inches between our ears.
So do you want to bounce a soccer ball off it and have a head collision?
And it's that short-term reward. Like I can play in the NFL for X number of years and make all this money. But, what we don't see is these guys 10, 15, 20 years later, if we do see them, like a Jim McMahon, who can barely get out of bed in the morning, has to wear sunglasses full time and always is nauseous. And it's like, you know what? Is it worth it? I'm not, that's a choice. They choose to play that game. But going back to the last piece about what coaches can do, I just wrote a post on Facebook the other day about the difference between transactional coaching and transformational coaching. A lot of coaches get caught up in the skill-specific, win at all costs, look at the record, how many scholarships are we getting, all of these measurables. But transformational coaching is, I'm coaching the whole athlete. Yes, I'm teaching them the game of football, baseball, basketball, whatever it may be, but I'm also educating the child or the athlete for life beyond the sport. And I hope to someday have an opportunity to train coaches in this area, because there's a book I'm reading right now called 3-Dimensional Coaching. First dimension is skill specific. Second dimension is the mental emotional piece. Third dimension is the spiritual piece. And if you're educating the whole child, the whole athlete, you're addressing all dimensions. Because when kids finish sports, I know for me, I don't look back on my favorite coaches and say, man, thanks so much for teaching me how to hand off the ball on the option, because I was a quarterback. I look back, in fact, I still reach out to my coaches and say, hey, I just want to thank you for pushing me to go further than I believed I could. That's what I remember. They transformed me, not just, oh yeah, we won 8 games and lost 3 and made it to the playoffs. Like, that's all irrelevant. It's the person I am today is a product of what some of those coaches did for me as a person, not just a player.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, another way when you're an adult, a lot of people are saying, well, what leadership book would you read? Or who's your famous leader? And I say, well, you don't know any of those people. Go back to your childhood.
Yeah.
Who connected with you?
Yeah.
Was it a teacher? Was it a coach? Was it a nun? Who connected to you?
Yeah.
And if that worked with you, that's probably the best leadership example you had.
Yeah.
Well, man, we went way over. Mike Sissel, Chief Creative Officer, KaleidoEye.com. Or marry Mrs. Kale. I do. Mrs. Kale, will you marry me?
Yeah,
I do. Thank you so much for all you do for Ahwatukee. Thank you so much for coming by. And I hope you inspired someone who call you up and say, I want you to coach my kid.
Awesome. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.